At Christmas dinner, my stepson laughed at my gift until the executor arrived. The scent of roasted turkey and pine needles filled the air, a familiar holiday aroma that usually brought comfort, but tonight it felt like a thin veil over a gathering of strangers. Julian was late. He was always late. A small act of defiance that kept me waiting, reminded me of my place. I checked the small velvet-wrapped box on the counter for the 10th time. Inside lay an antique silver pocket watch, its face cracked but still ticking. It had belonged to my father, and before that, his father. It was the only thing of real value I had to give, not in monetary terms, but in history. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that Julian might see the weight of that history, the continuity of a life lived, and understand that I wanted to include him in it. My late wife Sarah would have known what to do. She would have laughed at Julian's sullen moods, disarmed him with a hug, and made him feel like he belonged. But Sarah was gone 2 years now, and the house felt too large, too quiet. Her empty chair at the head of the table was a physical ache in the room. I had said it anyway, a silent testament to the ghost between us. When the doorbell finally rang, the sound was sharp, intrusive. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the door, past the twinkling lights of the tree that felt more like a stage prop than a celebration. Julian stood on the porch, his coat collar turned up against a wind that wasn't blowing. He was 24, a mirror of Sarah's sharp features and dark hair, but where her eyes had been warm, his were guarded, hard. He held a bottle of wine like a shield, something expensive and impersonal. "Elias," he said, the name a flat statement, not a greeting. "Julian, come in. It's cold." He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the living room with a critical sweep. "Still have the same furniture. I thought you might have changed things, moved on." The implication hung in the air, heavy and sour. Moved on from her, from us. "I like the furniture," I said softly, leading him to the dining room. "Dinner is ready." We sat. The roast was perfect, the potatoes fluffy, the wine poured. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware. I tried to fill it with small talk. The weather, the state of the garden, the new roof I'd finally had installed. "Did you get the paperwork I sent over?" Julian asked abruptly, cutting through my monologue about shingles. He didn't look at me, focusing instead on carving his turkey with surgical precision. "The request to buy out my share of the house. It's a fair offer. Below market, honestly, you'd have a clean slate." "I haven't looked at it, Julian. It's Christmas Eve. It's a transaction, Elias. Holidays don't stop the clock." He took a sip of wine. "All the interest on the estate's debts, which, I remind you, are still pending." The tension coiled in my stomach. The estate was in probate, a tangled legal mess that Sarah had left behind. A complex trust that neither of us could access without the other's cooperation, or so the lawyers said. Julian saw it as a jackpot waiting to be unlocked. I saw it as a final mess to clean up. He didn't understand that the house was the only part of the estate that mattered to me, the only place Sarah's laughter still echoed in the walls. I cleared my throat. "Before dessert, I have something for you." My voice felt small in the large room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet box, placing it on the table between us. It looked insignificant against the fine china. "It's not much, just something I thought you should have." Julian looked at the box, then at me. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of joy, it was a smirk of pure disbelief. He reached out, picked up the box with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, and opened it. He stared at the watch for a moment, then let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel sound, like glass breaking. "A watch?" he asked, his voice rising. "You're giving me a watch? An old, broken watch?" "It's not broken," I said, my cheeks burning. "It just needs winding. It's a family heirloom. My father's." He closed the box and pushed it back toward me. "And what about my father? What about my mother's family? I come here, to the house she paid for, and you hand me a piece of your junk? Do you have any idea what's locked up in that trust? The stocks, the bonds, the land? And you think I want this?" He gestured to the box with contempt. "This is insulting. I want the deed, Elias. I want the account numbers. I want what's mine." "Julian, please," I whispered, aware of how weak I sounded. "Your mother wanted us to figure this out together. She loved you. She loved both of us. She loved me enough to leave me in limbo with you. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He leaned over the table, his face reddening. "I'm done playing house with you. I want the keys. I want the documents." "Where are they?" "In the safe, in your room." "I don't have them," I said, my voice trembling but firming up. "The executor has them." "You know that. We both have to agree on the release." "Then let's call him," Julian shouted, his composure finally shattering. "Let's call Mr. Henderson right now and get this over with. I'm tired of your sentimental games." He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. The room was thick with his anger, a suffocating heat that made the Christmas lights seem garish and mocking. I sat there, defeated, the untouched watch between us. I had failed. I had tried to bridge the gap with a piece of my past, and he had thrown it back in my face. The silence that followed his outburst was absolute, broken only by the sudden, loud ring of the doorbell. We both froze. It was too late for a visitor, too early for anyone we knew. "I didn't call anyone," Julian said, his aggression momentarily replaced by confusion. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a tall, severe-looking woman in a dark coat, holding a briefcase. I opened the door. "Elias Thorne?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. "Yes, I am Sarah Whitmore, the court-appointed executor for the estate of Sarah Thorne. I apologize for the intrusion, but I was instructed to arrive at this specific time. May I come in?" I stepped back, stunned. "Yes, of course." Julian was standing in the dining room doorway as I led the executor inside. His eyes widened when he saw the briefcase. A flicker of triumph crossed his face. He thought this was it. The end of the standoff, the transfer of power. "Mr. Julian Thorne," the executor said, acknowledging him with a nod. She didn't smile. "I am here to address a specific clause in the last will and testament, one that requires a physical token to be presented to me for verification." Julian stepped forward eagerly. "The token? You mean the keys? Or the safety deposit box codes?" "I've been waiting for this." The executor looked at him, her expression unreadable. "No, Mr. Thorne. The token is not a key or a code. It is a physical object, described in the will as the silver pocket watch, the heirloom of Elias's family, given to Julian as a gesture of goodwill." The air seemed to leave the room. Julian's face went blank, the colour draining from his cheeks. He slowly turned his head to look at the velvet box still sitting on the dining table. "The will states," the executor continued, opening her briefcase and pulling out a thick document, "that the discretionary trust, which constitutes the majority of the estate's liquid assets, is to be released to the beneficiary who demonstrates an understanding of sentimental value over material worth. Specifically, the clause reads, if my son, Julian, accepts the watch with gratitude and acknowledges its history, the trust is to be released to him immediately. If he dismisses the watch as trivial or demands the financial instruments instead, the trust is to be released solely to my husband, Elias, as a testament to his character and his preservation of our shared memory." She looked at Julian, her gaze piercing. "Mrs. Thorne left a letter for you, Mr. Thorne. She wrote that she needed to know if you saw her husband as a guardian of your legacy or an obstacle to your wealth. She wrote that the watch was the key, both physically to a safe deposit box containing the letter and the final release papers, and metaphorically to her blessing." Julian stared at the box. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a hollow, stunned silence. He looked at the watch, then at me, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. He had laughed at the very thing that held his inheritance. He had mocked the one object his mother had chosen to test him. "The terms are absolute," the executor said, her voice softening only slightly. "Because you have already, in the presence of witnesses, myself and Mr. Thorne, mocked the gift and demanded the financial instruments, the condition has been met. The trust is now irrevocably assigned to Elias." I stood there, the weight of the revelation settling over me. Sarah had known. She had seen Julian's materialism, his resentment, and she had prepared for it. She hadn't trusted him blindly. She had trusted me to endure him, to offer the olive branch, and she had trusted herself to judge the outcome. The modest gift wasn't for Julian at all. It was for me. It was her final way of telling me that I was the one who valued her memory, the one who deserved to carry it forward. Julian looked at me, his face a mask of shame and fury. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was louder than any shout. He turned, grabbed his coat from the rack and walked out the door, leaving it open to the cold night air. I didn't chase him. I didn't call his name. I simply stood in the quiet house, the smell of the cooling dinner mingling with the scent of pine. I walked to the table and picked up the velvet box. I opened it and looked at the watch, its hands still moving, ticking away the seconds of a new solitary piece. Sarah had given me the greatest gift of all, vindication, and the quiet understanding that I was enough. The heavy front door clicked shut behind Julian, the sound echoing through the hollow house like a gunshot. For a long moment, I didn't move. I stood in the center of the dining room, the executor's gaze heavy on my shoulders, the remnants of the feast growing cold on the table. The festive lights on the tree blinked in a steady rhythmic pattern, casting shifting shadows across the lawyer's stern face. She hadn't moved either, her hands resting on the leather briefcase as if it were an anchor. I finally broke the silence, my voice sounding rusty. "She really wrote that? A letter?" "Yes, Mr. Bourne," Sarah Whitmore replied. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a wax stamp bearing Sarah's initials. She placed it on the table beside the velvet box. Mrs. Thorne was a meticulous woman. She anticipated this outcome. She knew her son, she knew his pride, his singular focus. The lawyer's eyes flickered to the empty chair at the head of the table, a silent acknowledgement of the woman who had orchestrated this entire, painful drama from beyond the grave. I sank into my chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. I looked at the envelope, then at the watch. The silver casing gleamed under the soft dining room light. It was no longer just a watch. It was a verdict. It was the physical manifestation of Sarah's love for me, a shield she had forged in the paperwork of her will. "May I?" I asked, gesturing to the envelope. "Of course. It is addressed to you and to Julian, but the seal is to be broken by you first. The terms of the trust have already been executed. The documents are merely a formality now, a transfer of assets that will be processed by my office in the morning." She sat down in the chair opposite me, the one Julian had vacated, her posture rigid and professional. She seemed to understand that I needed a witness, a presence to ground me in this surreal moment. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the envelope. The wax seal cracked easily under my thumb, the sound brittle and final. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Sarah's handwriting flowed across the page, elegant and familiar, a script I had seen on grocery lists, birthday cards, and love notes scattered around this very house. I began to read, the words blurring slightly as tears welled in my eyes. "My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, it means you have passed the test. It means you stood your ground, you offered the olive branch, and you did not let Julian's bitterness consume you. It means you are alone in the dining room, and he is gone. I know this is cruel. I know it feels like a trap, and in many ways it was. But Elias, you must understand that I loved you both, but I loved you differently. I loved Julian with the fierce protective love of a mother, but I knew I had failed to temper his entitlement. I saw it growing in him, a weed, choking out the garden of his heart. I tried to correct it, but time was short. With you, my love, I found a partner. You were not a father to Julian in the traditional sense, but you were a guardian of my memory, a keeper of our shared life. I needed to know that if I were gone, the legacy of our love, the true legacy, would be safe with you, that you would not be bullied into submission, that you would not trade sentiment for silence. The watch was my grandfather's. I gave it to your father when we married, and he gave it to you. It represents time, continuity, and the patience of love. I hid the key to the safety deposit box in the back casing, behind the winding stem. It is a small, flat key, barely noticeable. Inside that box is the release for the trust, but also my final letter to Julian, explaining why he received only the legal minimum and why you received the heart of our estate. The money, Elias, is not a reward for your suffering. It is a tool. It is the freedom to keep this house, to maintain the garden, to fill the silence with music or travel or whatever brings you peace. It is the means to honor me by living fully, not by withering in grief. I leave you with the burden of my choice and the weight of my love. Do not squander it on guilt. Use it to build a life that I would be proud to watch from wherever I am. And if you ever see Julian again, Tell him I loved him. Tell him that his mother's greatest wish was for him to find value in something other than a bank statement. The door is not closed forever, Elias, but he must be the one to walk through it, and he must come empty-handed. With all my love, forever. Sarah. I folded the letter slowly, my vision swimming. I placed it on the table next to the watch. The lawyer, Sarah Whitmore, slid a sleek modern tablet across the table to me. The digital assets have been transferred to your account, Mr. Thorne. The physical deeds and bonds will arrive by courier tomorrow. The house is yours, free and clear. The trust was substantial. I looked at the tablet screen. The numbers were staggering. Far more than I had ever imagined. More than enough to secure the house for the rest of my life and then some. It wasn't just a safety net. It was a fortress. But looking at the figures, I felt no elation, only a profound aching sadness. This fortune was the price of Julian's arrogance, the cost of a son's refusal to see beyond the surface. What happens to Julian? I asked, my voice hoarse. Does he get nothing? He receives the portion of the estate mandated by law for a son of the deceased, a significant sum, mind you, but a fraction of the trust. He will not be destitute, Mr. Thorne, but he will not be wealthy. He will have to work, to earn, to build his own life. Sarah wanted him to learn the value of effort. The lawyer's tone was devoid of judgment, merely stating facts. The letter she wrote for him will be delivered to his address tomorrow morning. It will explain the terms, though I suspect he already understands the consequences of his actions tonight. I nodded, staring at the watch. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It was heavier than it looked. I turned it over and found the small indentation near the winding stem. With a fingernail, I pried it open, revealing a tiny, flat key, exactly as Sarah described. It was a key to a physical box, but it was also the key to my future and the lock on Julian's past. Thank you, Miss Whitmore, I said, finally looking up at her, for coming here tonight, for being the one to deliver this. It was my duty and my honor, she replied, standing up. She gathered her briefcase. Mrs. Thorne was a remarkable woman. She planned this with the precision of a general and the heart of a poet. I will see myself out. The paperwork will be in your hands by noon tomorrow. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold night, leaving me alone in the suddenly vast, silent house. The door clicked shut, and the silence rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or grief. It was the silence of resolution. The silence of the story concluded. I sat at the table for a long time, the cold food forgotten, the lights of the tree blinking rhythmically. I looked at the empty chair where Sarah should have been, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel her absence as a void. I felt her presence as a warmth, a guiding hand. She had known me better than I knew myself. She had known that I would endure Julian's cruelty, that I would offer the watch with a genuine heart, and that I would accept her final gift with grace, not greed. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady now. I returned to the dining room and picked up the velvet box. I placed the watch inside it, but I didn't close the lid. I left it open, the silver face catching the light. It was a relic of the past, but it was also a bridge to the future. I began to clear the table. The motions mechanical but soothing. I scraped the cold food into the trash, rinsed the plates, and stacked them in the dishwasher. The mundane task grounded me, pulling me back from the surreal height of the evening's events. With each plate I cleared, I felt a layer of tension lifting from my shoulders. When the kitchen was clean, I turned off the dining room lights, leaving only the soft glow of the Christmas tree. I walked to the living room and stood before the fireplace. On the mantel were photographs. Sarah and me on our wedding day, Sarah and a teenage Julian at the beach, Sarah laughing in the garden. I picked up the photo of the three of us, taken a year before she got sick. We were all smiling, genuine smiles, unburdened by the future. Julian was looking at his mother, his expression open and happy. I had forgotten that look. I had let the memory of his anger overwrite it. I traced the outline of Julian's face on the glass. Sarah was right, the door wasn't closed forever. But it was a heavy door, and he would have to push it open himself. He would have to come back not for money, not for forgiveness, but for the connection he had mocked. And I? I would be here, in this house, keeping the light on. Not waiting, but living. I placed the photograph back on the mantel and walked to the window. Outside, The street was quiet, the snow beginning to fall lightly, dusting the cars and the lawns in a soft white blanket. The world was continuing, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded within these walls. I turned back to the room, to the warmth of the tree, to the watch on the table, to the letter in my pocket. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was vindicated, but I was not vengeful. I was wealthy, but I was not defined by it. I was Elias Thorne, husband of Sarah, guardian of her memory, and now the keeper of her legacy. I picked up the watch and wound it carefully. The mechanism clicked softly, the hands beginning their steady march around the face. Time was moving forward, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to move with it. I walked to the stairs, the watch in my hand, and began the climb to bed, leaving the lights of the tree to blink in the empty room, a silent testament to a love that had outlasted death itself. The next morning, the house was quiet, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant muffled sound of snowplows on the street. I woke earlier than usual, the weight of the previous night's events still pressing on my chest, a mixture of grief and a strange nascent peace. The letter from Sarah lay on the nightstand, the cream paper stark against the dark wood. I didn't need to read it again. The words were etched into my memory, a permanent script running behind my eyes. I made coffee, the ritual grounding me in the present. The watch sat on the kitchen counter, its face gleaming in the morning light filtering through the window. I had wound it before bed, and it was keeping time perfectly, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the silent house. It was no longer just a watch, it was a symbol of the trust Sarah had placed in me, a tangible piece of her will. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about Julian. Where was he now? Probably in his apartment, staring at the walls, replaying the events of the dinner in his mind. The shame must be eating at him, a corrosive acid burning through his pride. I felt a pang of something, not pity, not exactly, but a deep, aching sadness for the young man he had become. Sarah had seen the rot in him, the entitlement that had grown like a weed, and she had cut it out with the precision of a surgeon. It was a brutal act of love, a last-ditch effort to save him from himself. The doorbell rang, sharp and intrusive, jolting me from my thoughts. I checked the time. It was still early, barely past 8. I walked to the door, my heart beating a little faster. Perhaps it was Julian, returning with an apology on his lips and a newfound humility in his eyes. I peered through the peephole and saw a courier, a young woman in a heavy coat holding a thick manila envelope. My shoulders slumped slightly, a mix of relief and disappointment. I opened the door. "Elias Thorne?" she asked, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Yes, package for you. Requires a signature." She held out a digital clipboard. I signed my hand steady. She handed me the envelope, which was heavy and stiff, and turned to leave. "Have a good day," she said, her voice cheerful and impersonal. I closed the door, the envelope in my hand. It was from the law office of Sarah Whitmore. The finality of it settled over me. This was it, the official transfer, the paperwork that made it all real. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I carried it to the dining room and placed it on the table next to the watch. The juxtaposition was striking, the cold legal documents versus the warm sentimental object. One represented the cold hard facts of the estate, the other the love that had guided it. I spent the morning in a state of suspended animation. I cleaned the house, not out of necessity, but out of a need to fill the space with purpose. I vacuumed the carpets, dusted the shelves, and aired out the rooms. The house felt different now, cleansed of the previous night's tension. It was no longer a battleground, but a sanctuary. I was the sole occupant, the keeper of the flame. Around noon, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a local area code. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Elias? It's Julian." His voice was low, stripped of its usual arrogance. It sounded hollow, defeated. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "Julian, I was wondering when you'd call." There was a long pause on the other end, filled with the static of an open line. I got the letter from the lawyer this morning, the one my mother wrote." His voice cracked on the last word. "I know. I got the papers too." "I didn't read it," he said quickly, almost defensively. "I threw it on the table. I couldn't look at it." Another pause, longer this time. "Is it true, what she said, about the watch?" "It's true," I said softly. "The key was in the back." It opened a safe deposit box. The trust was conditional. He let out a shaky breath, a sound that was almost a sob. I laughed at it. I called it junk. His voice was thick with disbelief. She planned that. She knew I would. Yes, I said simply. There was no point in lying or softening the blow. She knew you. Why? The question was desperate, a child's plea for understanding. Why would she do that to me? I'm her son. Because she loved you, Julian. She loved you enough to try to save you from the person you were becoming. She saw that you valued money over memory, possession over connection. She couldn't leave you with a fortune that would only feed that hunger. She wanted you to learn the value of effort, of earning your place. Earning my place, he scoffed, but the sound was weak, without heat. I'm her son. I shouldn't have to earn anything. It should be mine by right. That's exactly the thinking she wanted to change, I said, my voice firmer now. Life isn't a right, Julian. It's a gift. And love isn't an inheritance. It's something you build day by day. You tried to tear it down, and she stopped you. He was silent for a long time. I could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven. So what now? You get everything. The house, the money, all of it. And I get nothing but a lecture from a dead woman. You get the legal share, I corrected him. It's not nothing. It's enough to start over, to build a life. But you don't get the trust, and you don't get the house, not unless you can prove you've changed. Not unless you can look at this watch and see what it really means. He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. And how am I supposed to do that? You have it. It's yours now. The watch is just an object, Julian. The meaning is what matters. And right now, the meaning is that you failed a test your mother set for you. The only way to pass it now is to understand why you failed. I don't understand anything, he whispered. I just know I lost you. I lost everything. You didn't lose me, I said, the words surprising even me. You pushed me away. There's a difference. I'm still here, Julian. In this house. I'm not going anywhere. Why would you want me here? He asked, his voice raw with pain. After everything I've said, everything I've done, I've been awful to you. Because Sarah asked me to keep the door open, I said. And because, despite everything, I remember the boy who used to build forts in the living room with me. I remember you laughing at my terrible jokes. I remember a time before the money, before the anger. I remember you. He didn't respond. The line went quiet, save for the sound of his breathing. After a minute, he spoke again, his voice barely audible. I don't know how to fix this. You don't fix it, I said. You just start again. You start by acknowledging what you did, by accepting the consequences, and by trying to be better. The money isn't the point, Julian. It never was. It was just a test. And you failed. But tests can be retaken. Life gives you second chances. You just have to be willing to take them. I'll think about it, he said, his voice still hollow. I need to think. Take all the time you need, I said. I'm not going anywhere. The line went dead. I held the phone for a moment, listening to the silence. It was a start. Not a resolution, not a forgiveness, but a start. A crack in the wall of his pride, a sliver of light in the darkness of his anger. I spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet contemplation. I read the legal documents from the law office, my heart heavy with the numbers and the cold, precise language of the law. The trust was indeed substantial, a sum that would ensure I could live comfortably for the rest of my life. It was a safety net woven by Sarah's love and foresight. I felt a profound gratitude, but also a sense of responsibility. This wasn't just money, it was a legacy. I had to use it wisely to honor the woman who had entrusted it to me. As evening fell, I prepared a simple dinner for myself, just enough to eat. I sat at the dining table, the watch in front of me, ticking softly. I thought about Julian, about his voice on the phone, the sound of a young man lost and confused. I thought about Sarah, about her strength and her love. I thought about the future, a future that was now mine to shape. I picked up the watch and held it in my palm, feeling the warmth of my skin against the cool metal. It was a bridge between the past and the future, between Sarah and me, between me and Julian. It was a reminder that love endures, that memory is powerful, and that sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that test us, that force us to look deep into ourselves and see what we're made of. I placed the watch back on the table and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the night. The snow had stopped, and the world was blanketed in white, pristine and silent. A new day was coming, a new chapter in my life, in Julian's life, in the life of this house. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more pain, more struggle, more misunderstandings. But there would also be hope. There would be the steady ticking of the watch, the memory of Sarah's love, and the open door waiting for the day Julian chose to walk through it, empty-handed and ready to begin again. I sat in the silence of the house, the echo of Julian's voice still hanging in the air like a fading ghost. The phone was dead in my hand, the screen dark. I placed it gently on the table next to the watch. The ticking seemed louder now, a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart. He had called. That was something. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was a crack in the armor, a fissure of light in the wall of his pride. I stood up and walked to the living room, drawn to the mantel and the photographs. I picked up the one of the three of us again. Julian's smile in the picture was genuine, his eyes crinkled at the corners. He was holding Sarah's hand, but he was looking at me, a look of childish trust on his face. I traced the glass over his image. That boy was still in there, buried under layers of resentment and entitlement. Sarah's test had been brutal, but it was a surgeon's cut, designed to remove the cancer of greed before it consumed him entirely. I put the photo back and turned to the window. The street was dark, the snow reflecting the faint glow of the streetlights. It was a blank canvas, waiting for the morning. A new day, a new beginning. I thought about the money, the trust, the legal documents sitting in the envelope on the table. It was a fortune, more than I could spend in a lifetime. But it felt like a burden now, a heavy stone in my chest. It was the price of a son's humiliation, the cost of a family torn apart. I went back to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I needed to think, to process, to decide what to do next. The watch on the table seemed to watch me, its hands moving with relentless patience. It was Sarah's voice, her wisdom, her love made manifest. She had given me the power, the resources, the freedom. But she had also given me a responsibility. I was the guardian of her legacy, the keeper of her memory. And part of that legacy was Julian. I sat down at the table again, the legal documents in front of me. I opened the envelope and spread the papers out. The language was dense, full of legal jargon that made my head spin. But the numbers were clear. The trust was mine. The house was mine. The bonds, the stocks, the liquid assets, all mine. Julian received a lump sum, a significant amount by any standard, but a pittance compared to the whole. It was enough to give him a fresh start, but not enough to fuel his arrogance. It was a lesson in humility, wrapped in the cold, hard paper of the law. I read through the documents slowly, my mind racing. I could keep it all. I could live comfortably, travel, enjoy the peace and quiet of the house. I could honor Sarah by living well as she had asked. But was that enough? Was that what she would have wanted? To see her son estranged, her husband alone, their family fractured by a test she had orchestrated. I thought about the letter she had written, the words she had left behind. The door is not closed forever, Elias, but he must be the one to walk through it, and he must come empty-handed. She had given me the power to keep the door open, to leave the light on. But she had also given me the power to close it, to lock it, to move on. The choice was mine. I picked up the watch and held it to my ear, listening to the soft ticking. It was a sound of continuity, of time moving forward. It was a reminder that life goes on, that grief and loss are not the end of the story. They are just chapters in a longer narrative. I had to decide what the next chapter would be. I spent the rest of the night in contemplation, the watch ticking steadily beside me. I thought about Sarah, about her strength and her foresight. She had planned this all out, knowing how it would play out, knowing how Julian would react, knowing how I would feel. She had trusted me to handle it, to be the adult, to be the guardian. She had given me the tools, and now I had to use them. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I made a decision. I would not keep the money for myself. I would not hoard it away like a dragon guarding its treasure. I would use it to rebuild what had been broken, to honor Sarah's memory in the most meaningful way possible. I stood up and walked to the phone. I dialed a number I had memorized, the number of Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Mr. Bill Thorne," he said. "I was expecting your call. The documents have been delivered." "Yes," I said. "I've received them. And I've read them. I understand the terms. There was a pause. And you accept them? The transfer of the trust to your name. I accept the responsibility, I said. But I have a proposition, a modification to how the funds are used. Mr. Develotiers, Henderson's tone shifted, becoming more cautious. The trust is irrevocable, Mr. Brang. Thorn. The terms are set. You cannot change the beneficiary. I'm not changing the beneficiary, I said. I'm changing the use. I want to establish a new trust, a smaller trust, from the funds I've inherited, for Julian. A trust that is conditional, not on money, but on progress. I explained my idea, my voice steady and clear. I would set aside a portion of the money for Julian, but it would be held in trust to be released in increments. The first release would be for education, for a trade school, for a degree, something that would give him a skill, a purpose. The second release would be for a down payment on a modest home, but only if he could show proof of steady employment for a year. The third release would be for his own children, if he ever had any, to be used for their education and well-being. It was a structured, conditional inheritance. It wasn't a handout, it was a hand up. It was Sarah's lesson extended into the future. It was a way to keep the door open, to leave the light on, but to require effort, to require change. Mr. Henderson listened patiently. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. That is an unusual request, Mr. Dawn. The trust is yours to do with as you please, but structuring it in this way, it would require new legal documents, new trustees. I understand, I said. I'm willing to pay for the legal fees. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Sarah wanted him to learn the value of effort. I want to give him that chance, but on terms that honor her memory. Another long pause. Then, I will draw up the papers. It will take a few days, but I believe it can be done. It's a generous gesture, Mr. Thorne. A very generous gesture. It's not generosity, I said. It's love. It's what Sarah would have wanted. I hung up the phone and felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I hadn't kept the money for myself. I hadn't cut Julian off completely. I had found a middle ground, a way to honor Sarah's wishes while also offering Julian a path back. It was a risk. He might reject it. He might never change. But the door was open. The light was on. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet purpose. I met with Mr. Henderson, signed the new documents, and established the new trust. It was a complex process, but it felt right. It felt like I was doing something meaningful, something that Sarah would have approved of. I also cleaned the house, not just the physical space, but the emotional one. I packed away some of Sarah's clothes, not to erase her, but to make space for the future. I kept her photographs, her books, her favorite chair. But I also made room for new memories, for a new chapter. I thought about Julian often. I wondered where he was, what he was doing. I hoped he was thinking, reflecting, considering the path he was on. I hoped he was reading the letter from his mother. Really reading it, letting the words sink in. One evening, a week after the dinner, the doorbell rang again. I walked to the door, my heart pounding. I peered through the peephole and saw him, Julian. He stood on the porch, his hands in his pockets, his head bowed against the cold. He looked different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes shadowed. I opened the door. The cold air rushed in, but neither of us moved. Julian, I said. He looked up, meeting my eyes. There was no anger in his gaze, no defiance, just a deep, profound sadness. Elias, he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all pretense. We stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. The snow fell lightly, dusting his shoulders. I read the letter, he said finally, his voice barely audible. My mother's letter. I nodded, waiting. She was right, he whispered. About everything. I was a fool. An arrogant, greedy fool. He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. I laughed at the watch. I treated you like dirt. I treated her memory like a transaction. I'm so sorry, Elias. The words hung in the air, fragile and precious. I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the moment I had hoped for, the moment Sarah had planned for. It wasn't a grand gesture, no dramatic apology. It was a quiet, humble admission of fault. Come in, I said, stepping back. It's cold out here. He hesitated, then stepped inside. I closed the door, shutting out the cold. We stood in the foyer, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly in the living room. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve it. I needed to tell you. I needed to say it to your face." "I know," I said, "and I hear you." He looked around the house, his eyes lingering on the dining room where the watch still sat on the table. "The watch," he said. "It was the key." I laughed at the key. "It was," I said. "But it's more than that. It's a reminder of time, of continuity, of love." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't want the money," he said suddenly, looking up at me with desperate eyes. "I don't care about the trust. I don't want anything. I want to try. I want to be better. I want to be the son she wanted me to be." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was it. The empty-handed return. The willingness to start again, without the guarantee of wealth, without the expectation of reward. "Julian," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "the money is there. I've set up a trust for you. It's not a handout. It's a chance to build something, to learn, to grow. It's on terms that honor your mother's memory. It's conditional on your progress, on your effort." He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock. You did that? For me? "Your mother wanted you to learn the value of effort," I said. "I want to give you that chance. But you have to earn it. You have to work for it. You have to prove that you've changed." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over and tracing paths down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. "I will," he whispered. "I swear I will. I'll do whatever it takes." "I know you will," I said, "because you're Sarah's son, and she believed in you. Even at the end." He nodded, unable to speak. We stood there in the quiet house, the weight of the past 2 years lifting, replaced by a fragile, hopeful peace. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was still work to be done, still trust to be rebuilt, but it was a beginning, a new chapter. I led him to the living room and sat him down on the sofa. I poured him a glass of water. We talked, not about the money or the watch, but about small things. About his job, about his friends, about the things he missed. It was stilted at first, awkward, but slowly, the walls began to crumble. The boy I remembered started to peek through. The boy who laughed at my jokes, who built forts in the living room. Later, as the evening deepened, I walked to the dining room and picked up the watch. I held it out to him. "Here," I said. He looked at it, his eyes wide with fear and wonder. "I can't," he said. "I don't deserve it." "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about accepting. Accepting the past, accepting the present, accepting the future. It's a watch, Julian. It tells time, and time is moving forward. For both of us." He reached out with a trembling hand and took the watch. He held it gently, turning it over in his palm. He looked at the cracked face, the ticking hands. He brought it to his ear and listened to the steady beat. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Elias." "You're welcome," I said. "Welcome home." He stayed for dinner. We ate simple food, and the conversation flowed more easily. We talked about Sarah, about her laugh, her love of gardening, her terrible singing voice. We shared memories, weaving them together into a tapestry of the past. It wasn't a celebration, but it was a remembrance, a honoring of the woman who had brought us together, and in her own way had brought us back together. When Julian left that night, he didn't take the watch. He left it on the table. "Keep it safe for me," he said, "until I've earned the right to wear it." I nodded, understanding. It was a promise, a commitment. I walked him to the door and watched him walk to his car, his shoulders straighter than before. He turned and waved, a small, hesitant gesture, but it was enough. I closed the door and leaned against it, the house quiet once more. I picked up the watch and held it to my ear. The ticking was steady, constant, a heartbeat in the dark. It was the sound of time moving forward, the sound of a new beginning. I walked to the mantel and placed the watch next to the photograph of the three of us. It was a bridge between the past and the future, a symbol of love that had endured, of forgiveness that had been earned, of a family that had been broken but was now, slowly, being mended. I looked around the house, at the twinkling lights, the quiet rooms, the open door. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was at peace. Sarah's legacy was secure, not just in money or property, but in the love that remained, in the hope that had been rekindled, in the promise of a future that was finally, truly mine to shape. The watch ticked on, a steady, rhythmic reminder that time heals, that love endures, and that sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that test us, that force us to look deep into ourselves and see what we're made of. And in the quiet of the house, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future, I knew that I was enough. We were enough, and that was the greatest gift of all.